Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to try to unravel a man, Lawrence Bishnoi. He went from a seemingly ordinary student in Punjab and ended up an alleged international kingpin, our sources. A really interesting mix this time. We've got investigative articles, news reports, even glimpses into a book called, well, I Killed Situ Musawala.
Yeah, it's a story full of contradictions, unexpected turns for sure. We're talking about someone who was actually nicknamed after a British administrator.
Oh, really?
Yeah, known for his milk white complexion, but who ended up allegedly leading a life steeped in crime.
Okay. And you know what gets me? He's cultivated this image of himself as a protector, like a modern-day Robin Hood type. He even helps out local kids in his village, so that makes his alleged involvement in all this violence even more strange.
It's definitely a fascinating puzzle. And today we're going to try to put all the pieces together. Trace Bishnoi's journey from his early life all the way up. Understand how he climbed the ranks of the criminal underworld. And of course, explore the controversies, the ones surrounding his alleged role in those high-profile killings and international crime syndicates.
Okay, so first, let's go back to the beginning. What kind of childhood did Lawrence Bishnoi have?
Well, surprisingly, his early life seemed, pretty normal. He was born into a land-owning family, rural Punjab, even attended a Christian boarding school. There's even this interesting thing about his nickname Lawrence. Some say he was given that name at birth because of his fair skin, while others think he adopted it later, just because he liked it.
Huh, so even his name has this mystery about it. Almost feels like a carefully crafted persona, even from way back then. But was there like a specific event, one that marked his entry into this criminal world?
Yeah, there seems to be a pretty clear turning point. It all started in 2008, a seemingly small incident at Punjab University. Bishnoi was into student politics back then, and he allegedly, brandished a firearm during one of the elections.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this was his first encounter with the law, and it almost feels like foreshadowing, like a hint of what was to come.
So it was kind of like a spark that ignited something much bigger.
Exactly. Instead of deterring him, this little brush with the law, it seemed to embolden him. His criminal activities escalated really quickly, from those little campus fights to forming a whole gang, allegedly engaging in illegal weapons trading, and finally expanding his influence way beyond the university.
So he was learning and growing his criminal enterprise step by step, like an apprenticeship almost.
That's a chilling way to put it. But you're right. Each incident, each encounter with the law, almost like it was a learning experience, fueling his ambition and ruthlessness. And there's one really disturbing example from this period. Bishnoi allegedly killed a candidate. This candidate had defeated his friend in a college election.
Oh, that's horrifying. It really shows a disregard for human life. Like he was willing to use violence to get what he wanted. But how did he go from these small-time crimes to becoming national known?
Well, his time in jail actually played a big part in that. What's fascinating and disturbing is that instead of rehabilitating him, the jails seemed to help his criminal network grow.
It's like that saying, if you want to be a criminal, go to jail. Sounds counterintuitive. But I can see how that environment could foster those connections and skills.
Exactly. Think about it. You're surrounded by people with criminal experience. You've got time to plan. You're constantly being exposed to different criminal tactics. Journalist Ritesh Lackey even noticed a change in Bishnoi after a stint in Rajasthan jail. He seemed more hardened when he came out, even more connected.
So the jails were almost like colleges of crime for him. Scary thought. It makes you wonder about how effective prisons really are. But let's talk about Bishnoi's public image. He's created this persona very deliberately. It's almost like he's playing a character.
Oh, absolutely. He's really good at managing his image. He knows the power of the media, how people perceive him. There are times he's released videos straight from jail, reciting patriotic poems like he's trying to be a man of the people. He's also been known to offer his own kind of justice, especially when the legal system seems to have failed.
Right, like when that young girl was tragically burned to death in a land dispute, Bishnoi went on social media, offered support to her family, promised them justice. It's a smart move to get sympathy, especially from people who feel let down by the system.
Classic tactic. Used by people who want to work outside the law, but still have people on their side. They act like vigilantes, protectors, even while they're doing illegal things.
And this image helped him gain a following, almost like a cult figure.
It did, and that leads us to the incident that really made him famous, or infamous, depending how you see it. His threat against Salman Khan in 2018.
Ah, yes, the Salman Khan incident, that was a big turning point. But for our listener who might not know the story, could you give some context?
Sure. It all goes back to 1998. Salman Khan was involved in a black buck hunting case. Now, This is a sensitive issue for the Bishnoi community. They consider the black buck sacred. So fast forward to 2018. Bishnoi is being taken to court, and he publicly threatens Khan, says he's going to harm him.
And that wasn't just talk, was it? He had an actual plan to assassinate Salman Khan.
That's right. One of Bishnoi's associates was tasked with checking out Khan's house. He even figured out the best weapon to use and the perfect spot for the attack. Luckily, he was arrested before anything could happen. But it shows how dangerous Bishnoi and his network are.
It's chilling to think about a famous Bollywood star targeted like that. It feels like this event shifted Bishnoi's criminal career. His crimes get bolder, more high profile. We start to see hints of connections to bigger, more dangerous organizations.
You're absolutely right. This is where things get even darker. It leads us to the murder of Punjabi singer Sidhu Moosewala in 2022. Bishnoi actually claimed responsibility for that.
Yeah, that was a huge shock. It affected everyone, not just the music world. But before we get into that, I think it's important to talk about the National Investigation Agency. They were brought in for this case. Can you explain what the NIA is and why they got involved?
Of course. The NIA is India's top counterterrorism task force. They investigate and prosecute crimes related to national security, terrorism, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They were brought in because Moosewala's murder was more than just a murder. There were signs of a much bigger conspiracy going on.
And those suspicions turned out to be true when the NIA released their findings.
Right. Their charge sheet was a bombshell. It painted Bishnoi as more than just a gangster. They said he was an international criminal with alleged ties to pro-Khalistani groups, specifically the Babar Khalsa International, or BKI.
Wait, so now we're talking terrorism. This is getting really serious. For our listener, the BKI is a militant organization. They want an independent Sikh state called Khalistan. They've been linked to a lot of violence in the past. This connection to Bishnoi is huge.
It is. The NIA even connected Bishnoi to that attack on the Punjab Police Intelligence Headquarters in 2022. They said the BKI was responsible and that they had support from Bishnoi's network.
It's unbelievable. Someone who started with petty crimes at university could allegedly become involved in something this big.
Yeah.
And then there's this Daba calling thing he allegedly uses to talk to his people.
Ah, yes, Daba calling. Pretty creative way to avoid getting caught. One of his guys calls the victim, usually for extortion. At the same time, they're calling Bishnoi from another phone. They put the two phones together so Bishnoi can talk to the victim directly. No trace.
That's resourceful in a scary way. Shows he plans things out, understands technology, and from what I'm seeing, his crimes go beyond just violence and extortion. Looks like he's into drug smuggling, too.
You're right. Back in 2022, the Gujarat police linked him to a massive drug bust, worth over 200 crore rupees. It seems he's added international drug trafficking to his portfolio, making him a real major player in the criminal world.
It's incredible and terrifying how he's built this whole criminal empire from prison. And speaking of prison, the security around him is insane. Solitary confinement, special guards, direct order from the Ministry of Home Affairs. He can't leave jail no matter what.
Shows how dangerous they think he is. But even with all that, his story doesn't end there. It takes another wild turn when Canada enters the picture, bringing an international element to this already complex situation.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. What's the connection between Lawrence Bishnoi and Canada?
Well, in 2023, the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, he actually accused the Indian government of being involved in an assassination. Hardeep Singh Nijjar, he was a Canadian citizen and a pro-Khalistani activist. And get this, Canada specifically named Lawrence Bishnoi, said he was a key part of this alleged plot.
Hold on, are you saying that Canada is accusing India of using Lawrence Bishnoi to carry out killings on Canadian soil? That's a massive accusation, could have huge consequences.
It is. Canada is claiming the Indian government used Bishnoi and his network to target people who are against the Modi government, basically accusing them of using a criminal organization to silence opposition overseas.
Wow. And how did India respond to that?
India completely denied it, said they had nothing to do with Nijjar's assassination, called the accusations baseless and politically motivated. They said it was ridiculous to suggest they would work with the criminal they were trying to extradite.
So we've got a high-stakes standoff, Lawrence Bishnoi right in the middle of it. It's like something out of a spy movie. And to make things even more complicated, Canada is also saying that Bishnoi's gang is responsible for multiple murders of Canadian citizens between 2022 and 2024.
Right. Once again, India denies it. Says Canada is just trying to damage India's reputation, score some political points.
So we have two very different stories, serious accusations on both sides. What evidence did Canada give to back up their claims?
Well, the Canadian police said they had evidence that Indian diplomats were gathering information on Canadian citizens who criticized the Indian government. They said this information was then given to criminal organizations, maybe even Bishnoi's gang.
That's a big deal. It's just that India was spying and maybe even using criminals to silence dissent in other countries.
Yes, and it
Yeah.
caused a huge diplomatic crisis. Canada kicked out an Indian diplomat, and India did the same. This whole thing really hurt the relationship between the two countries. And it makes you wonder about India's influence and their methods for dealing with threats.
It's like a spy thriller. International intrigue, assassinations, and this shadowy criminal figure pulling the strings. What's crazy is that even from prison, Bishnoi seems to be a big part of this global drama.
Right. It shows how he can operate across borders, exert influence from behind bars. Makes you wonder about his control over his network and how connected he is to powerful people.
And just when you think it can't get any crazier, there's another assassination. Baba Siddiqui, a prominent political figure in Mumbai, gunned down in 2024.
Yeah, and the way it was done was similar to other hits linked to the Bishnoi gang. 3 shooters, a well-planned attack, and a suspected connection back to Bishnoi himself.
There's a twist to this one, right? One of the shooters who was caught, a guy named Raju, he gave a press interview from jail, and he made some wild claims.
He did. Raju said that Baba Siddiqui was killed because he was a supporter of Dawood Ibrahim, that notorious underworld figure who's been on the run from India for decades. Raju also said that Siddiqui was facing charges under the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act, better known as MCOCA.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Lawrence Bishnoi is also facing charges under MCOCA, isn't he?
He is. So it makes you think, is there a pattern here? Is Bishnoi taking out rivals who are facing similar accusations?
That's a chilling thought. But before we jump to conclusions, our listener needs to know what MCOCA is and why these charges are so serious.
You're right. MCOCA is a powerful law, specifically designed to fight organized crime. It's much harder to get bail, the rules for evidence are different, sentences are harsher, compared to regular criminal law.
So if someone's charged under MCOCA, it means the authorities think they're a serious threat, part of a bigger criminal operation.
Exactly. They don't use it lightly. The fact that both Bishnoi and some of his alleged victims have been charged under MCOCA definitely needs more investigation.
Okay, let's dig into this MCOCA connection a bit more. Why is it so important when we're talking about Lawrence Bishnoi and his alleged victims?
Well, as we've said, MCOCA targets organized crime specifically. It lets law enforcement go after the whole network, not just individuals. So when someone's charged under MCOCA, it means the authorities think they're part of a larger criminal enterprise.
And that's where things get interesting. It's not just Bishnoi who's facing these charges. Some of the people he's accused of targeting, like Baba Siddiqui, were also implicated under MCOCA.
You got it. And that raises a big question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that Bishnoi is getting rid of rivals, people who could threaten his own network, or who might have information that could incriminate him?
That's a scary thought. But it makes sense, considering everything we know about Bishnoi. He's a master strategist, a manipulator, always thinking ahead. But this MCOCA connection also brings up some bigger questions about our legal system. Can it really deal with organized crime effectively?
Definitely. Organized crime is constantly changing, and our laws need to adapt. Acts like MCOCA are important, but they're just one part of the solution. We need countries to work together, we need good intelligence, and we need to target the money that fuels these criminal enterprises.
It's a complicated problem, no easy answers. But this deep dive into Lawrence Bishnoi's world shows us how important it is to understand how organized crime works. The more we know about their methods, their reasons, and their networks, the better chance we have of fighting them.
I agree. Knowledge is power, and by shining a light on these dark parts of society, we can demand accountability, we can support effective policies, and we can work towards a safer world.
Well said. Now let's switch gears a little and talk about the murder of Sidhu Moosewala. It really shocked the world. Bishnoi said he was behind it, right?
He did. But like everything else in this story, there are different sides to it. Bishnoi claimed he ordered the hit because he thought Moosewala was connected to a rival gang. But Moosewala's manager said Bishnoi completely misunderstood the lyrics of one of his songs, said there was no real connection to any rivalry.
So a misunderstanding that ended in tragedy. But it wasn't just a personal thing, was it? This is where the NIA's investigation gets interesting. They said Bishnoi was operating on an international level.
Right. The NIA's charge sheet revealed that they believe Bishnoi was working with pro-Khalistani groups, the Babar Khalsa International, or BKI specifically. They even connected him to that attack on the Punjab Police Intelligence Headquarters, said it was BKI, with support from Bishnoi's network.
Wow. So now we're talking about possible terrorist activities. It's a long way from those days of student politics and petty crimes. What's amazing is that even from prison, Bishnoi seems to be in control. He's still got a lot of influence.
That's what makes a real criminal mastermind. They can manipulate things and people, even when they seem powerless, and Bishnoi is a master at that.
All right, so we've covered a lot. From a seemingly normal childhood to allegedly becoming this international criminal figure, Lawrence Bishnoi's story is full of twists and turns that are hard to believe. Before we finish this part of our deep dive, what stands out to you the most about Bishnoi's journey so far?
It's the contradictions, the two sides of him. On one hand, he's this protector. He helps local people, presents himself as a man of the people. But on the other hand, he's accused of terrible crimes, murder, terrorism. That duality is fascinating and really disturbing.
I agree. It's like he's trying to be two things at once, the folk hero and the criminal mastermind. It's a fascinating puzzle that we'll try to solve in the next part of our deep dive. So we've dug into Bishnoi's rise, his calculated image, and the scary escalation of his alleged crimes. But one thing that really gets me is that MKOCA connection. Why would someone who's already facing serious charges under MKOCA, an act designed to fight organized crime, why would they target other people who are also implicated under the same act?
It's a head-scratcher, for sure. It's puzzled investigators and analysts alike. One theory is that Bishnoi is, well, strategically eliminating rivals, people who could be a threat to his network, or who might have information, stuff that could get him into even more trouble.
It's like a twisted game of survival. Take them out before they take you out.
Right. And by going after people who are already under scrutiny for organized crime, Bishnoi could be deflecting attention from himself, trying to consolidate his power. Remember, we're talking about someone who's allegedly involved in everything: extortion, drug trafficking, assassinations, maybe even terrorism.
The stakes are incredibly high. It seems like Bishnoi's playing a very dangerous game. But what is it about him that makes him so compelling, even with all the bad stuff?
I think it's the combination. The ruthlessness, but also that carefully crafted image. He's managed to make people believe he's a protector, someone who stands up for the little guy, even though he's accused of doing some truly awful things.
It's like a Robin Hood story gone wrong. Helps kids in his village, but then allegedly involved in things that cause so much suffering and fear. It's a paradox, hard to understand.
And it gets even more confusing when you add social media to the mix. He knows how to use it, how to make people see him the way he wants. He posts videos, recites poetry, acts like he's the voice of the people, all while running a criminal network.
That's pretty disturbing, the level of manipulation. But let's go back to the MCOCA thing. We know it's a powerful tool to fight organized crime. Can you break it down a bit more? Why is it so relevant to what Bishnoi is accused of doing?
So MCOCA isn't just about punishing individual criminals. It's about going after the entire operation, the infrastructure, the money, the whole network that supports organized crime. When someone gets hit with MCOCA charges, it means the authorities think they're a big player, not just some small-time crook.
And that's what's so interesting about Bishnoi allegedly targeting other people who are also facing MCOCA charges. Could it be that he's trying to weaken his rivals? Get rid of people who might snitch on him?
It's a solid theory. By targeting individuals who are already under investigation, he could be trying to throw a wrench in things. Disrupt the investigation, make sure people stay quiet, all to protect himself.
Makes sense, given everything we know about him. He's always thinking a few steps ahead. But this MCOCA thing makes you wonder, are our laws strong enough to deal with organized crime?
Well, organized crime is always changing, finding new ways to operate. Our legal system needs to keep up. Acts like MCOCA are important, but they're not enough. We need international cooperation, intelligence sharing, and strategies to cut off their funding.
It's a tough problem, no doubt. But exploring Bishnoi's world like this really shows how crucial it is to understand organized crime. The more we know, the better we can fight back.
I agree. The more we know, the more power we have. We can push for accountability, support the right policies, and hopefully create a safer world.
All right, so we've covered the MCOCA connection pretty thoroughly. It's a disturbing pattern, and it tells us a lot about how Bishnoi thinks. But let's move on to another controversy involving Bishnoi. The assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada and the fight between India and Canada.
Yeah, this brought Bishnoi's story onto the international stage. caused a huge diplomatic rift between two major countries.
For our listeners who might not be familiar, can you quickly recap what happened?
Okay, so in 2023, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Canadian citizen, was assassinated in Canada. He was a big figure in the Sikh separatist movement, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau publicly blamed India for the assassination, specifically naming Lawrence Bishnoi as a key player.
So Canada is basically accusing India of using criminals to carry out political assassinations on Canadian soil. That's a huge accusation. It could have massive consequences for the relationship between the two countries.
It could, and it did. Canada claimed Indian intelligence agencies were gathering information on people who opposed the Modi government and giving that information to criminal organizations, potentially including Bishnoi's gang.
And how did India respond?
India denied everything, said they had nothing to do with Nijjar's assassination, called the accusations baseless and politically motivated, said it was crazy to suggest they would work with a criminal they were trying to extradite.
Two totally opposite stories, each side pointing the finger at the other. What evidence did Canada have to back up their claims?
The Canadian police said they had proof that Indian diplomats were spying on Canadian citizens who were critical of the Indian government, and they claimed this information was then shared with criminals, possibly Bishnoi's gang.
Pretty serious stuff. It suggests that India was actively involved in espionage and maybe even using criminals to silence dissent abroad.
It is serious, and it caused a major diplomatic crisis. Canada expelled an Indian diplomat, and India did the same. This whole thing strained relations between the two countries and raised concerns about India's global influence and their methods.
It's like a spy movie plot. International intrigue, political assassinations, and a shadowed criminal mastermind at the center of it all. And even from prison, Bishnoi seems to be playing a crucial role.
It shows how he can operate across borders. Even from behind bars, he has influence. It raises questions about how much control he has over his network and how connected he is to powerful figures.
And Canada has also accused Bishnoi's gang of being responsible for several other killings of Canadian citizens between 2022 and 2024.
They have, and again, India denies it all. They say Canada's just trying to make India look bad and score some political points.
So many accusations, denials, and conflicting stories. A tangled web with serious implications for international relations, national security, and the fight against organized crime.
Definitely. This whole thing highlights how difficult it is to fight organized crime in today's interconnected world. And it shows how these criminal networks can be used for political purposes, blurring the line between crime and government actions.
A lot to think about, but let's bring it back to Bishnoi himself. What does this incident tell us about him? The man at the center of this international storm.
I think it shows just how ambitious he is, how ruthless, and how good he is at strategy. It's unsettling, really. He went from a small-time crook in Punjab to someone who can allegedly influence events on a global scale.
Fascinating and terrifying at the same time. It reminds us that even from prison, some people have incredible power. They can set things in motion that have a huge impact on the world.
And it makes you think about power itself. What motivates people like Bishnoi? The length they'll go to get what they want.
It's a story filled with ethical questions, power struggles, and this complex relationship between crime, politics, and international relations.
Definitely. It challenges our assumptions about the world and forces us to face some uncomfortable truths about power and the reach of criminal organizations.
And as we learn more, I can't help but wonder, what's next for Lawrence Bishnoi? Will he ever be held accountable for his crimes? Will his influence continue to grow, even from prison?
Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, the story of Lawrence Bishnoi isn't over yet.
I agree. As we continue to untangle this complicated story, I think it's important for our listener to consider some key questions. What motivates someone like Bishnoi? What are the things in our society that allow people like him to become so powerful? And most importantly, what can we do to fight these international criminal networks? Okay, before we go to the last part of our deep dive, let's take a minute to think about everything we've learned. From his simple beginnings in Punjab to his alleged involvement in global crime syndicates, assassinations, and diplomatic controversies.
It's been a wild ride, a journey through ambition, power, and what humans are capable of, both good and bad.
And as we get ready to wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with something to think about. Knowing what we know now, do you think Lawrence Bishnoi is a product of his environment? Or is he a mastermind who figured out how to game the system? Or maybe a bit of both?
That's a tough question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. But it's worth thinking about as we continue to learn about him and the impact of organized crime in the 21st century.
We've really gone deep into Lawrence Bishnoi's world in this deep dive. From student politics to alleged international conspiracies, it's mind-blowing that this all traces back to one person. But as we wrap things up, I keep coming back to this question. What makes someone like Bishnoi tick?
It's the million-dollar question for criminologists and psychologists, right?
Hmm?
What leads someone to a life of crime, especially on this scale? Is it power they crave? Revenge? Or maybe it's a twisted sense of justice, where the ends justify the means.
And we can't forget that Robin Hood element. Helping people in his village, funding schools, even settling local disputes, but at the same time, allegedly ordering hits and running a global criminal operation. It just doesn't compute.
It's a textbook example of what we call cognitive dissonance, holding two totally opposing beliefs at once. He sees himself as a benefactor, someone who helps people, but he's also involved in extreme violence and criminal activity.
It's like he's got these two separate compartments in his head, convincing himself that the good outweighs the bad.
And that's what makes it so dangerous. He can keep going down this road, escalating his crimes while feeling justified.
So if someone like Bishnoi is driven by this warped sense of justice, what does that say about the rest of us? Does it mean our systems have failed to deliver justice, leading some to take the law into their own hands?
That's a tough one. But we have to admit that organized crime thrives where people don't trust the legal system, where there's corruption, where people think the regular ways of getting justice don't work.
So, in a way, someone like Bishnoi is both a symptom and a cause of a broken system. He's a product of it, but his actions make it even worse.
That's a good point. And it shows how we need to attack this problem from all sides. It's not just about catching criminals, it's about fixing the things that allow organized crime to grow in the first place.
So what can we do? Any solutions to this mess?
Well, we need to make our institutions stronger, make sure they're transparent and accountable. Everyone should have equal access to justice. That will build trust in the system and make people less likely to take the law into their own hands.
Makes sense. But what about the global side of this? We've seen how Bishnoi allegedly works across borders, finds the loopholes, and partners with international groups. How do we stop that?
That's where working together globally is key. Law enforcement agencies need to work together, share intel, and coordinate their efforts to disrupt the money flow and take down these criminal networks.
And technology's got to play a role, right? We talked about data calling, how Bishnoi allegedly uses it to stay under the radar. As technology gets more advanced, are we falling behind in this fight?
It's definitely a challenge. Law enforcement needs to adapt, use new tech to keep up with these criminals. We need better surveillance, cybercrime units to track down online activity. It's a constant race.
It sounds like it. Both sides trying to outsmart each other. But beyond all the tech stuff, what about the people? How do we stop people from getting involved in these criminal networks in the first place?
That's where education, job opportunities, and social support come in. We got to give young people a real chance, a better path than crime. Good education, job training, and support to address poverty, inequality. Those are the things that push people towards crime.
So we need to treat crime as a societal issue, not just an individual problem. Fix the root causes and at the same time improve our law enforcement and justice systems.
Exactly, a multi-pronged attack. It'll take collaboration, new ideas, and a commitment to fixing the social and economic problems that feed organized crime.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Lawrence Bishnoi's world, what's the one thing our listeners should take away from all this?
Organized crime isn't just happening in some dark corner. It's a global problem that affects us all. It destabilizes governments, hurts economies, makes people lose faith in our system.
And like we've seen with Bishnoi, it can even cause international conflicts and diplomatic crises.
It's a wake-up call. We need to be aware, informed, and actively fight against organized crime. Support law enforcement, advocate for better policies, and work to build a fairer, more just society.
Well said. And on that note, it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Lawrence Bishnoi. It's been a wild ride. Shocking revelations, tough ethical questions, and a glimpse into a world of power and ambition gone dark.
It's a story that'll probably continue to unfold. And like we've seen, it's bigger than just one man. It's about the challenges we face today, the complexities of human nature, and the constant fight for justice and security in a world that's changing fast.
So to our listener, keep digging into this. Go back to the sources we mentioned, read more, and think critically about what you find.
Stay informed, stay involved, and never underestimate the power of knowledge. It can shed light on even the darkest parts of our world.
Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.